All right, hello everyone. Welcome to week 3. All right, so this week we're going to be discussing police strategies. There's a ton of information this week, and it's very, very important, kind of foundational information that you guys need to know moving forward. So I've actually made 2 videos this week. The first video is going to discuss a lot of the research studies and some of the policing strategies, but then the second video is going to be only community policing and problem-oriented policing, because those are 2 of the real big strategies that are in use in police departments right now. So I thought it was really, really important that we spent some time on those. So there's going to be 2 videos this week, this one, and then there's going to be a second one. All right, so as we discussed last week, as the police have evolved from the political era to the reform era, and then into that era, kind of after the reform era, where some of those tenets of the reform era have been called into question, the strategies that police have used have also evolved, over time, right? So the relationship between the police and the community was one of the things that was of great concern during that time, kind of post-reform era. So it led to this reevaluation of what the police were doing and how they were doing it. All right, so as part of that, during the 70s, there was this increase in academic research into what the police were doing, and some of that research cast doubts on the effectiveness of some of the strategies that they were using, such as motorized patrol for controlling crime, the need for rapid response to every criminal report or every or call for service, and the effectiveness of criminal investigations. Okay, and during this time, police were also encouraged to utilize more academic research and analysis in their approach to policing. All right, so prior to the 70s, much of what the police did was focused on tradition and professional judgment. Okay, which can result in effective policing. Like it doesn't mean that just because what they've been doing, it doesn't mean it automatically doesn't work, right? So some of those things can be used to effectively police, but of course not always, right? And getting into that kind of trap of, well, we've always done it this way, right? That doesn't always, it's not always a good purpose, or it doesn't always serve really anybody, not just the police. All right, so one of the most influential early studies on police operations was the Kansas City Preventive Patrol Experiment. Okay, so the purpose of this study was to really determine what was the effect of random preventive patrol on crime, what was the effect on citizen feeling of security, and then some other things that they looked at. But those were the 2 of the biggest ones. So police departments and citizens believed that the police randomly patrolling deterred crime, and they believed that it increased chances of intercepting crimes in progress. So to test that, the researchers split the city up into 15 areas, and then further split each area up to include experimental and control beats. Okay, so experimental beats were ones where they changed the amount of patrol that was going on, and control beat was one where they kept the regular amount of randomized patrol. Just kept regular patrol. So in some of the beats they had more patrol, in some beats they had less. Okay, and then the control had the same. But what they found was that patrolling really did not have an effect on crime rates for crimes that they thought would be impacted by that, such as like burglaries, auto thefts, robberies. And it also did not affect citizen attitudes toward the police, citizen feelings of security. It didn't affect the rates of reported crime. It didn't affect traffic accidents, arrests, or anything else that the study examined. So the conclusion, from this was that preventive patrol may not be as effective as people think it is, and that the time and resources that are put into preventive patrol could possibly be used, for maybe something that's more effective, some other kind of strategy. So the people that were surveyed in this study, they didn't even notice that there was an increase in patrol, and they didn't notice that there was a decrease in patrol. So the question is, why do some police departments continue to use randomized patrol? And this is actually the discussion board question for the week. So really think about what are some reasons why police would continue to participate in preventive patrol when it hasn't really been found to impact anything. Okay, so the second important study concerned response times. So the belief was that a quick response time increases the chances of arrest, and that a quick response time would increase citizen satisfaction with the police. But the effectiveness of a rapid response from the police is limited by two main factors. Okay, so the first is that the time between the crime occurring and the person realizing that something has happened is really important. Okay, so especially with property crimes. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Especially property crimes. So the amount of time between when it happens and when it gets reported to the police may be substantial. Okay, so for example, some years ago, someone stole my barbecue grill off my front porch. It was just, it was just a charcoal barbecue grill. It wasn't anything fancy. One day I pulled into my house and I thought, man, something looks different. But it took me a little bit to figure out what it was that was different. It took me a while to figure out that, oh man, my grill's gone. I have no idea when it was stolen. I ended up not even reporting it. The grill really wasn't worth much. I had no idea when it had been stolen. I had no information that I could share with the police at all. But in that situation, if I had called the police, them responding quickly to me would not have made a difference at all in finding my grill or apprehending the suspect. Okay? The second factor is that most people usually delay on average of 6 minutes before calling the police. So they will normally call someone else prior to calling the police. And 6 minutes may not sound like a lot, but if you're wanting the police to apprehend whoever has committed the crime, 6 minutes is a really long time. Okay, so if people are waiting that long before they call the police really have little chance of apprehending someone, regardless of how quickly they get there. So then the study also found, so the other part of this was that citizen satisfaction would increase if the police responded quickly. But the study found that isn't really the case either. That citizen satisfaction with the police was based less on necessarily how quickly they responded, but rather on telling them when a police officer would respond, and then of course what the officer does when they get there. So people don't always expect the police to come right away, but if the police tell them, hey, we'll be there, there's one call before you, or it's going to be however much time, and then they come, people are generally okay with that. So then that made the police think about, well, maybe we can handle calls differently based on the critical nature of the call. Okay? So it says in the book, and I'm going to reiterate it here, it's important to remember that serious does not always equal critical. Okay? So if you're talking about something like, I think the book said a 2-day-old assault, well, that's a serious crime, right? And no one would say that it's not a serious crime. That is not critical at that point because it's already 2 days old. Okay? But if you have someone who's trying to go to work and there's a car blocking their driveway, obviously that's a far less serious type of event, but it's something that needs a quicker response. Okay? So does that make sense? Right? So just because something's serious does not mean it's critical. Where something could be far less serious than something else, but a police response is much more important to be done quickly. Okay, so for calls like a crime in progress, car accidents with injuries, obviously a quick response is necessary. But the majority of the calls that the police receive may not require a quick response. All right, so the third important study is the RAND study of detectives. Okay, and that examined criminal investigations and criminal investigators. They found that criminal investigation units were pretty inefficient and ineffective. They found that only 20% of serious crimes were solved. And when serious crimes were solved, it's usually through information obtained from victims rather than through leads developed by detectives. So in 75% of the cases that were solved, the suspect's identity is known or is easily determined at the time the crime was reported. So the majority of detective time is spent reviewing reports, documenting files, attempting to locate and interview victims, for cases with low probability being solved. Okay? The police also collect a great deal of physical evidence that's usually not subjected to analysis and does not contribute to crime solving. Okay, so some of the physical evidence stuff, setting things in the lab costs money. It takes time. So there's reasons why not all the physical evidence ends up getting analyzed. Okay, if they have other types of evidence that they can use, then there may not be the need to analyze all the physical evidence. So the results from this study were really surprising because the general belief was that detectives could solve whatever crimes were reported, and that's what they were doing. They'd get a case, they'd solve it, and that's just what was happening. People really had no idea that such a small percentage of cases were actually solved. Something else that has contributed to this much more recently than the study of the Rand study is what's known as the CSI effect. Okay, so the CSI effect, and it's actually in jury instructions now, and it's talked about a lot, is that it led people, everybody knows the show CSI. There's 12 different ones, right? All the CSIs. And even NCIS, there's all these other kind of crime shows. But CSI was the first one. So it's called the CSI effect. And it led people to believe that these very complex cases could be solved within 60 minutes or less through forensic analysis. It also led people to believe that police always have overwhelming evidence, including DNA, for all cases. And that is just simply not true. So what was happening is people were getting on these juries, and prosecutors were presenting their evidence, and because they didn't have what the people expected based on these shows, they were finding people not guilty because they didn't believe there was enough evidence. So the CSI effect really is a real thing, and it's really impacted the criminal justice system. But even with all the advancements that we have now, the new technology, the new ways of analysis, detectives still only solve 20 to 25% of serious crime cases. And when they do, most evidence still comes from witnesses. So, what has happened because of this? What has been the result from these studies? So, police departments have looked for ways to make police work more efficient and effective. There has been an increase in crime analysis, which is basically determining where the crime's occurring, because crimes do not occur equally or evenly across a city, right? There's some places that are more crime prone, and there's certain places where they're not. Okay, so if you're a police department, knowing where the crimes are occurring is important because you don't need to have your police officers spread out evenly across the city if there's nothing happening over here. Okay, so this has led to what's called directed patrol, which makes patrol more directed, targeted, and concentrated. A later iteration of that was known as hotspots policing. Okay, so a hotspot is an area of high crime. Okay, so the police would then increase the resources to that particular area to address that particular crime problem, rather than just having patrol units just randomly patrolling throughout the city. Police departments have also begun to have differential response to calls. Not all calls require a police response. Some departments now take reports over the phone. People can go online and file reports for things that don't necessarily need an officer to come out. Investigation units have begun utilizing kind of case screening factors to screen out cases that have a low chance of being solved. They have a list of solvability factors that they use. So cases that have a low chance of being solved based on these solvability factors, they get less priority than ones that have a high chance of being solved. But that being said, crimes like murder still get full investigations, regardless of how low a probability exists, for it to be solved. So these solvability factors and this case screening, that's all for lower level stuff. Like serious crimes still get full investigations and everything from detectives. All right, so another focal point to come out of the 70s and 80s was the need to improve police-community relations. Okay, one of the biggest hindrances, actually, to police being involved in the community was the patrol car. Prior to the patrol car, police would walk the streets. They'd interact with those on their beat. But once the car was introduced to police work, most walking beats disappeared and replaced it with officers in a car. Now, certainly there's advantages to police officers being in cars, right? No one will say there's no advantages to that, because there obviously are advantages to that. But now it introduced a barrier between the citizens and the police. Okay, so even if the police are in the neighborhood, if they're sitting in their cars, that now has created a barrier as opposed to them standing on the sidewalk. Okay? So prior to community policing, they had programs, like they recognized this was a problem. So prior to community policing, they had programs such as community crime prevention programs. And those were predicated on the belief that if a community can be changed, then the behavior of those in the community can be changed as well. Another method they tried was called team policing. And this was probably the actual kind of precursor to community-oriented policing. But at the time, it was not very successful. So this approach was to create a team of police officers that would be responsible for improving relations with the community, and then to work closely with the community. But even though that didn't necessarily work when they tried it the first time, for a variety of reasons, some departments in the 80s did try to bring foot patrols back because as radio technology increased, officers now have two-way radios, and if they're out walking around, they still are able to be in contact with the dispatcher and other officers. Foot patrol, just like the Kansas City experiment, foot patrol did not really impact crime much, but citizens did feel safer with foot patrol. Citizens had more satisfaction with the police, and they did notice if patrols increased or decreased. So in that regard, the foot patrol study was also interesting in how it was different from Kansas City, because Kansas City was motorized patrol, and these were foot patrol studies. So citizens did feel safer, they had more satisfaction with the police, and they did notice if patrols increased or decreased. So these differences were attributed to what's known as broken windows theory. Broken windows theory is just that if officers, in this case foot patrol officers, paid more attention to disorderly behavior and minor offenses, and are in a better position to understand their beats, and just pay attention to who and what is going on in their assigned districts, that's what attributed to these differences in citizen satisfaction with the police. All right, another important kind of development out of all of this is that this belief that police strategies and practices should be based on evidence, not just belief, well, I think this will work, or this is what we've always done. Okay, this is what's called evidence-based policing. So the basic idea of this is that police should adopt practices that have the strongest evidence of effectiveness. Okay, so if they pick things that have been proven to be effective, then that should help police departments be more effective and also efficiently use their resources. Okay, so there's mounting pressure, not just for the police to do this, but for the entire criminal justice system to do this. But one issue related to this is that if police are going to do this, that if police want to do this evidence-based policing, they have to be willing to participate in research that examines various police practices. And police departments are oftentimes resistant to this. So if they're wanting to use evidence-based practices, they have to have something that determines whether or not something is effective, and that's participating in research. Some departments are very, very open to it. Some departments are not open to it at all. This also leads to the question of whether policing should be based primarily on scientific knowledge or should be based on professional opinion. Okay, both of these have merit. Okay, people that have experience, that experience matters, right? And what they've experienced matters, and that can inform what the police does. Okay, but also scientific knowledge is important, right? Research studies that test effectiveness are also important, because just because something works one place does not mean it's going to work another place. Okay, so both of these approaches have merit, and really a combination of the two is probably the best way to go. Okay. All right. This is the end of video 1. So I'm going to stop here. And then I'm going to make another video that discusses just community and problem-oriented policing.